Hi folks, and welcome to this video on English Language Paper 2. We're going to look at an example text in this series of videos on this paper. So first of all we're going to do is read it and I'll talk you through the texts. So the first source we're looking at is adapted from Pictures from Italy by Charles Dickens, written in 1846. So the first thing I noticed there is the author's surname, Dickens. He's in Italy, so that's where he is. And in terms of when, we're in 1846, so we're in the middle of the Victorian period. You might be studying A Christmas Carol for your literature GCSE, so you might already be familiar with Dickens and his style of writing. Now, in the introduction section, it tells you that in this extract, Dickens is travelling towards Pisa in a horse-drawn carriage. You might know the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Italy, that kind of circular tower on an angle. You might know that it's kind of beautiful setting, but also we're thinking in the Victorian period, probably quite remote. Consider the horse-drawn carriage as well. This is not going to be the most comfortable mode of transport. Okay, so let's read. And as we read, think about the 5 W's. So who, what, where, when, and why. There is nothing in Italy more beautiful to me than the coast road between Genoa and Spezia. On one side, sometimes far below, sometimes nearly on a level with the road and often skirted by broken rocks of many shapes, there is the free blue sea, with here and there a picturesque felucca gliding slowly on. On the other side are lofty hills, ravines besprinkled with white cottages, patches of dark olive woods, country churches with their light open towers, and country houses gaily painted. On every bank and knoll by the wayside, the wild cactus and aloe flourish in exuberant profusion, and the gardens of the bright villages along the road are seen, all blushing in the summer-time with clusters of the belladonna, and are fragrant in the autumn and winter with golden oranges and lemons. Okay, so that's the first paragraph. Because it's a Victorian source, there's going to be some words in here which are probably unfamiliar to you. And I apologise to any Italian speakers. I wasn't quite sure how to pronounce the double Z and the double C, so you can correct me in the comments below if you want to. And you'll also notice that I stumbled across a couple of the words as well as I'm reading, which shows you the kind of high level of challenge in terms of the vocabulary in the text. So what we need to be able to do when we're looking at a Victorian source without our teacher is pull out the main bits of information and not get worried or hung up on the vocabulary that we're maybe not familiar with. If we can work out the meaning of that vocab from the context, that's great. So let's think about the 5 W's and apply them to this first paragraph. Well, the who, we know this is by Charles Dickens. It's in the first person. So in that first sentence, there is nothing in Italy more beautiful to me than the coast road. So we can kind of gather that it's a non-fiction text. So Dickens is probably the narrator. What is he doing? Well, he's travelling on the coast road between Genoa and Spezia. Again, sorry for my pronunciation if I've said that wrong. And he's looking out at the landscape. Where is this landscape? It's in Italy. So activate all of your images of Italy in your mind. It's going to be hot, probably. It's going to be beautiful, very verdant, very green. We've got the sea, like the Mediterranean Sea, absolutely beautifully lapping against the shore. When is this? Well, we already know it's 1846. Why is he travelling? I'm not sure we know that yet, but what we do know is that he's kind of relishing the landscape. So he talks about the dark olive woods and the wild cactus, the aloe flourishing in exuberant profusion. Aloe is a type of plant. Flourishing means that it's growing incredibly well. Okay, so Dickens has set the scene for us. Let's carry on from line 11. Some of the villages are inhabited almost exclusively by fishermen, and it is pleasant to see their great boats hauled up on the beach, making little patches of shade where they lie asleep, or where the women and children sit romping and looking out to sea, while they mend their nets upon the shore. There is one town, Camoglia, with its little harbour on the sea, hundreds of feet below the road, where families of mariners live, who time out of mind have owned coasting vessels in that place, and have traded to Spain and elsewhere. Seen from the road above, it is like a tiny model on the margin of the dimpled water shining in the sun. Descended into by the winding mule tracks, it is a perfect miniature of a primitive seafaring town, the saltest, roughest, most piratical little place that ever was seen. Great rusty iron rings and mooring chains, capstans and fragments of old masts and spars choke up the way. Hardy rough weather boots and seamen's clothing flutter in the little harbour or are drawn out on the sunny stones to dry. On the parapet of the rude pier, a few amphibious-looking fellows lie asleep, with their legs dangling over the wall, as though earth or water were all one to them, and if they slipped in they would float away, dozing comfortably among the fishes. If the church is bright with trophies of the sea and votive offerings, in commemoration of escape from storm and shipwreck. The dwellings not immediately abutting on the harbour are approached by blind low archways and by crooked steps, as if in darkness and difficulty of access they should be like holds of ships or inconvenient cabins under water, and everywhere there was a smell of fish and seaweed and old rope. Okay, what I want you to do is pause the video and think through your 5 W's, so who, what, where, when, and why, and what can you add to our responses for those questions based on the paragraph we have just read. You're going to need to reread the paragraph, and as I've said before, don't get hung up on not knowing some of the words, but pull out the information that you do understand. Okay, so stop the video, think about your 5 W's, and then start the video again when you're ready. Right, so in terms of our questions, the who is still the same, although we have some fishermen in the vicinity now as well. What? Well, Dickens is still travelling through the countryside, but this time the where is slightly different because he's come to this fishing village, this fishing town that seems to be called Camoglia, and he's looking at the boats and the fish and the sea, and he's describing that in a lot of detail. The when is still the same, we're still in the Victorian period, 1846. And the why, well, again, he seems to be relishing the journey. He's enjoying the journey and discovering new places and new people. Okay, let's keep reading from line 32. The coast road whence Camoglia is descried so far below is famous, in the warm season, especially in some parts near Genoa, for fireflies. Walking there on a dark night, I have seen it made one sparkling firmament by these beautiful insects, so that the distant stars were pale against the flash and glitter that spangled every olive wood and hillside, and pervaded the whole air. It was not in such a season, however, that we traversed this road on our way to Rome. The middle of January was only just past, and it was very gloomy and dark weather, very wet besides. In crossing the fine pass of Bracco, we encountered such a storm of mist and rain that we travelled in a cloud the whole way. There might have been no Mediterranean in the world for anything that we saw of it there, except when a sudden gust of wind, clearing the mist before it for a moment, showed the agitated sea at a great depth below, lashing the distant rocks and spouting up its foam furiously. The rain was incessant. Every brook and torrent was greatly swollen, and such a deafening leaping and roaring and thundering of water I never heard the like of in my life. Okay, again, pause the video, think through your 5 W's for that last section, and then start the video again when you're ready. So again, the who is the same, still got Dickens. What is he doing? He's still travelling through Italy. Again, the location has changed. They've passed the fishing village and they're going up into the mountains, I think, at this point. And it's really cloudy. The weather has totally changed. So we've got a real change of tone here. This is not the kind of warm and sunny Italy we might imagine from picture postcards, but it's a place with some really bad weather happening. Why does he seem to be enjoying this journey? Does he seem to be relishing this journey? He's certainly surprised now. In line 45 and 46, he says, I never heard the like of in my life. And I think he is still enjoying the difference, the kind of experience of somewhere new, of having an adventure almost. Okay, let's look at the second source. And again, we're going to think through our 5 W's as well. This source is also set in Italy. You can see it's called A Glimpse of History by someone called Joe Middleton, but the date on this one is very different, so it's 2023. So already we have our who, it's Joe Middleton who's going to be speaking here. 2023 is very recent, so already we're thinking about the differences between Dickens travelling in the Victorian period with very limited technology and Joe Middleton probably on a plane, probably with her phone, probably with lots of technology, and in a situation quite similar to some of us maybe when we go on holiday. Okay, so let's read. My abiding memory of my first few days in Italy is the heat. Oppressive and insistent, it invaded every corner of my hotel room, so that even the tiles on the bathroom floor radiated waves of warmth. Within minutes of stepping out of the air-conditioned airport, after a brief and rather uncomfortable flight in which I saw nothing but slept all the way, I was so sweaty and sticky that no amount of chilled water or ice cream could assuage my discomfort. Even nighttime brought no relief. In fact, even though I left the windows open, the heat seemed so to close in on me with overpowering smugness. It had won the battle, and I, with my pathetic handheld fans and bottled water, didn't stand a chance. Okay, you do the work this time. Pause the video, write down your 5 W's, start the video again when you're ready. So the who is Jo Middleton. The what, well, she's in Italy. She's talking about the heat. Where is she? Well, we know it's Italy. When is this? 2023. Why? Again, not entirely sure. We can imagine maybe she's gone on holiday. However, this is where we see the difference with Dickens. Dickens really seemed to be throwing himself into the experience of being somewhere different, being somewhere new and exciting. Jo Middleton doesn't seem to be enjoying this at all. She hates the heat. Let's carry on reading from line 9. The next morning was no better, and I decided that if the weather wasn't going to change, then I would have to learn to cope. On went the shorts, the strappy top, and the sunglasses. In the bag went yet more bottled water, the sun cream, and my phone. I was going to face the day and the soaring temperatures, armed for combat. Walking out of the hotel, I ploughed through the brick wall of heat, trying to step into the blinding sunlight as if I had lived in the Mediterranean my whole life. I slathered my arms and neck in factor 50 and flagged down a cab to take me to see a local viewpoint that overlooked the city. Of course, I could have walked. It wasn't far from my hotel to the sites tourists flock to like pigeons to a dropped ice cream. But the 5-minute drive in an air-conditioned taxi was worth every extravagant euro. It was with great reluctance that I paid the driver and extracted myself as slowly as possible from the cool air, easing myself back into the bleak reality of 30+ degrees. The blistering sun seemed to bounce off every surface, from the black tarmac to the white walls of the buildings. It reflected off car doors and windscreens and glinted off the sunglasses of other tourists. All around me, everyone looked so sophisticated in their summer clothes, making me feel every inch a British tourist abroad, and a northern one at that. And then I reached the end of the road, and the view opened up before me. Found myself standing in awe at the edge of a piazza, which overlooked the city below. Encircled by lush green hills, the medieval city seems protected from the outside world. Rust-coloured domes and stone towers rise high above the other buildings, staking their claim to importance. The heat had no claim over me anymore. I was completely in love with Italy. Okay, so we have some changes as we get to the end. It's still Jo Middleton. She's still traveling in Italy on holiday. She's still in this unnamed Italian town in 2023. But I think it's the why that's changing, the meaning behind this text, and why she's written this to communicate with us. We started off with her complaining about the heat and with her being very uncomfortable, whereas when we get to the end, we can see the reason why she's written this is to tell us about the beauty and the glory of Italy, that despite the heat, despite her discomfort, this is an incredibly beautiful place. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I hope that was helpful. In the next video, we're going to look at question 1.